For the first exercise, we'll be improving upon the financial dashboard. And so I'm going to show you how I might approach iterating on this, but you can totally feel free to experiment with different prompts and kind of figure out what works best for you. For these exercises, it's important to note which of the prototypes that you're iterating on. So for this first exercise, we will be iterating on the finance dashboard prototype. And so make sure the first sentence of your prompt says, I want to edit the design of the finance dashboard prototype. If you don't specify, it might go and edit something else or all of the prototypes. I'm going to go ahead and start with this. So I'm saying remove all drop shadows and make the components look more modern. The style should look like Robinhood, Cash App, and Stripe. The reason why I'm selecting these companies here is because they are all finance related, and also all these companies are well known for their design. And so I'm going to go ahead and hit return. I'm also telling it to remove drop shadows because I personally don't love drop shadows. A lot of times they're way too heavy, and personally I feel like they make a design look a little bit more dated. It's definitely possible to make really tasteful drop shadows, but typically it's a little bit harder unless you fine tune it a lot, and so I'm going to ask it explicitly to remove those shadows. This is what the design looks like now. I'm going to go ahead and put the old and the new side by side so you can kind of see what changed. There are a lot of really subtle differences here. So one you'll notice is that it changed these little titles here to be all caps and a little bit smaller so that they recede more into the background. The font weight here is lighter. There's no drop shadows. There's a gray background now. And also it's done some like swapping of the layout. So now the labels are down here instead of above, which I think makes sense. And then here as well, these are stacked instead of side by side. So if you're not sure where to go next, I recommend looking at the visual design principles. Honestly, I think the easiest one to work with is consistency, especially when you're early in your design career. So I'm going to say, let's focus on the colors, one of the design elements, and let's ask Agent to make the color palette a little bit more consistent. I'm noticing quite a few shades of green, and these colors here are pretty different from the colors here. So I'm going to go ahead and say simplify the colors on the page. Let's use fewer colors, consolidate them. This prompt worked okay, so you notice that it consolidated the colors up here a little bit, but it didn't really get to the colors on here. It also interpreted it as wanting to use a monochromatic palette, which I didn't necessarily want, and so I'm going to go ahead and try a different prompt. So I said, I don't want a monochromatic palette. Make sure all charts on the page follow the same color scheme. If you're unfamiliar, monochromatic basically means you're picking a color like blue and using light versions and dark versions of that color. So using a monochromatic palette is totally valid, but as someone who really loves color, I kind of want to see it play around with more color variation. So now notice how this blue and this blue is the same, and this green and this green is the same, and this blue and this blue is the same. Next, let's iterate a bit on the layout. So one thing about the layout that I don't love is that in wider screens, this saving trends diagram feels like it is floating and on its own. And so I kind of want to ask it to iterate a little bit on the layout. So I asked, can you improve the layout to make it look like something a top designer at Apple would approve of? I've noticed that adding this little prompt here has actually really helped because I think it helps it think more about visual design consistency, and also it references some Apple design guidelines as well. You notice here that Agent is explicitly listing out the different design principles that it's using: clean minimal aesthetics, generous white space, strong visual hierarchy, thoughtful typography, and purposeful spacing and alignment. These are all, I would say, pretty ambiguous, but I'm curious to see how it's going to implement each of these things. Also, a reminder that you should always take a look at what Agent is saying. Here it's listed out all the different changes it's made, and if you read what it's doing, you might be able to prompt it to do something similar to any of the changes it's made already. So notice how now the design has changed quite a bit because I asked it to update the layout. You notice that up here it's more balanced, but down here this is still on its own row. So I'm going to try to get it to iterate on this more so that this is not floating as much as it was before. This time I said, looking better, can you make the page more balanced? Savings trend feels awkward because of the gap on the right. So let's see what it does with that information. So now notice how the layout has changed again. Income sources is in its own row, and savings trend is in a 2-column layout with expense breakdown. If I was designing this, I'd probably switch some of these around, but I kind of like the direction that it's going in. For the next prompt, I'm asking Agent to be inspired by Edward Tufte's work. If you're unfamiliar with Edward Tufte, he's very well known for creating very intricate data visualizations. And so I'm curious if Agent will be able to pull learnings from Edward Tufte and bring it into this design. So it looks like this is what I came up with. It's not that different from what I had before, but you'll notice that I kind of changed up the colors a little bit. And this graphic here looks a little bit different. And I think it made most of the typography a little bit smaller so that more information fits on the page. I could definitely iterate on this forever, but here's a quick peek at the before and after about 5 prompts.